Hi, this is Kevin from Map Practical. This is part 2 of the Lab 8 demonstration video for Intro GIS. And this is the Upper Missouri River breaks. We've already worked through all this data and cleaned it up. And we're doing overlay analysis basically now. So it's important to clean up your layers over here and just end up with this ownership dissolve clip and the vegetation dissolve, our clipped roads in our original campsites. Okay. So what we want to do now is an intersect. We're going to do a point and polygon intersect. And so if we go under the geoprocessing, the intersect tool is used a lot, so it's just up here. Of course, you could find it in the toolbox or from the search bar. So if I click on that, I'm going to input first my vegetation dissolve, all right, and my campsites. And I'm going to copy this and head on over to my feature data set and paste it in there. And I'm just going to call this veg camp int for intersect, okay? And say save, and then let it rip. And so what this is going to do is give the properties of the vegetation to every one of the campsites. So it's already finished, it ran, it created a new point layer up here, and we're going to open up the attribute table and take a look. So the 117 campsites now have a column called River Guide that tells me what kind of vegetation is at each one of those campsites. So if we right click on the River Guide and we go to Summarize, this tool is going to summarize how many of the campsites are in each one of those different vegetation types. And if we look at it here, it always makes it some output. It's going to put it in the geodatabase, but you never want to leave it some output because then you have a bunch named the same thing. So this is going to become veg camp. Okay, we'll save that. And there's options to do different things with the other attributes, but we're just going to leave them for now, and it's just going to count them. Later on in the lab, we'll work with some of these. So we'll say OK. Yes, we want to add it to the map. And it added it over here. I'm going to right click on veg camp and say open. And it's just a new table, so there's no geographic data to this particular thing. The summary is just a summary table. So there are 36 campgrounds that are in the deciduous forest land. There are 8 that are in forested, 1 that's on an island, and 72 that are on some other vegetation type. And we can take a look at the statistics on count and see that it got all 117 campsites. So that's the answer to the first part of number 8 in the lab. And then we also want to calculate the percentages. So I'm going to add a new field, and we'll just call this %. Oops. And this time I'm going to choose a float because it's a few less decimal places. And then we're going to right click, and we're going to use the field calculator to calculate this. So it turns out what we need to do is do the count of the river guide divided by the total 117 campsites times 100 makes it a percentage, and say OK, and there we go. And then we can look at the properties for this guy and go to numeric, and we'll just go with 2 decimal places. Say OK, great. And so those are the percentages now in this lab. So the deciduous forest land has like 33.77, or excuse me, 30.77, forested 6.84%, island is 0.85%, and other is 61.54. And a way to check if you got this right is to right click and take a look at the statistics. And if your sum is close to 100, 99.999, that's close enough for government work right there. Okay, so that's how you fill out the table on number 8. And now we're going to do this whole thing over again, but for the ownership dissolve. So I'm going to turn off the veg campsites. I'm going to go to geoprocessing. I'm going to grab my intersect tool again, and this time it's going to be the original campsites and the ownership dissolve clip. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and go into my UMB data, and this is going to become my own camp int for intersect. Okay, and we'll let that rip. While that's working, I'm just going to read ahead, make sure I'm getting everything right. Okay, I think so. Super. So it added another point layer. I'm going to open up the attribute table on that guy. And this one, if we scroll over, we should see an owner class, and there we go. So now it's added which owner class each one of the campsites is in. So we're going to summarize this one. Summarize that, the owner class, and we're going to put it in our geodatabase, and we're going to call this one Own Camp. Cool. Save it. Definitely don't want to just leave it as some output. And okay. And yes, I want to add it. And then Own Camp over here is its own little table. I'm going to open it. And there we go. So if we take a look at the statistics on the count of the campgrounds, you'll notice something a little interesting. Before, we've always had 117. In this case, it's 115. And the reason for that is that a few of the campsites didn't fall in any owner class. Okay? So we've got under the private owner class 8 campsites, state government 5, Bureau of Land Management, so BLM 55, and in the water there's 47. And that's a little strange, but we'll get to that in a second. So we're going to add a field, call it %, make it a float again, and then we're going to right click on this guy and field calculate it again. So this is going to again be the count of the owner class divided by 115, which is our count of campsites, times 100. So it's converted to a percentage. There we go. And then go ahead and fix up those decimal places there. Just go with 2. That should be plenty. Great. And then if we check our statistics, it adds up perfectly to 100. So you did do it right. Okay. All right, and so the answer to that one then is private, we've got 6.96%. You could round that to 7. State government, 4.35%. BLM, 47.83%. And water, 40.87%. Okay, which you could round to 1. So you could round all these decimals up to a whole, and it's okay. We're not going to dock you on it. All right, so that's the answers pretty much to number 9. Number 10 asks why some campsites appear to be in water when clearly campsites can't be in water. Well, really the only way that that could be true is if for some reason the actual locations of the campsites were wrong, and maybe they were taken by GPS points. I'm going to turn off the enter and just have my little tents. But it also could be a fact that the water is not in the right place. Perhaps it was digitized from satellite imagery during the high water mark in a spring flood. So the answer to number 10 is that either the location of the campsites are off or the location of the river shoreline is off. There's really the only things that can be causing our problems. All right, so it's probably a good time to save. There we go. And then let's see why we move on to some other things here. Okay, cool. Our next question is how many of the campsites are within 100 meters, 500 meters, or further than 500 meters from a road? So to do that, we're going to need to do a multi-ring buffer around our roads. So I'm going to use the search tool this time to find the multi. And if I just type in buffer here, you can see we got a multi-ring buffer tool. So we'll go ahead and get that up. And input on that one is going to be our road clip. And then the output is going to be in our feature data set. And this is just going to be called roads buffer. Cool. And the way you have to do it, you have to type in 100, and then you hit the little plus, and it puts it into the field. And then you hit the 500, hit the little plus, it puts it in the field. And then down here under the distance, right, the buffer unit, we have to choose meters. So there you go. So now it's going to create 2 rings around the roads, one at 100 meters and one at 500. And we'll let it rip. It shouldn't take too long. Cool, it's just about got it. Take a sip of water. Excellent. All right, and so if I zoom in, you'll see what it did. So there you go. The black is the original roads. This is the 100-mile or 100-meter buffer in green, and the blue is the 500-meter buffer around the roads. Okay. All right. So now we want to figure out how many campsites fall within those buffers. So you guessed it, we're going to do another intersect. So we're going to go up to our geoprocessing tools, get our intersect. And we're going to drop in our campsites, and we're going to drop in our roads buffer. Okay, and this is going to end up being our road buff underscore int for intersect. All right, and we'll say okay. And that shouldn't take too long. There we go. All right, and it created another point layer. I'm going to open up the attribute table on that. And there is a field in here that tells us the distance, and it's called distance. And that's actually the answer to number 11. So the distance field tells us. So I'm going to go ahead and run a summary on this so that we can figure out some of these distances. So we'll do summary. Great. And then, of course, we want to change this. So this is going to be our road buff. And it could be road buff camp because it's about campgrounds, right? And we'll say save. And then we'll let the summary run. Yes, I want to add it. And then I'm going to open that table up. And there we go. So we've got 8 campgrounds are within 100 meters of a road. And we've got 19 campgrounds that are within 500 meters of a road. The statistics on this, you guys could probably add it in your head, is 27, right? So what we're really trying to do, though, is fill out, and I'll show you real quick, this guy right here. So we're trying to do the number of campsites and the percentage. But we didn't get a greater than 500. Well, we can calculate that out because we had a total of 117 campgrounds. So if we have 27 that are within these two, then the rest of them have to be 90. So it's pretty easy for you to do the math and figure that out. Okay, so let's go ahead and calculate our percentages again. So we're going to do add a field, %, and we'll make this a float. Cool, and then we got to calculate it with the field calculator. So it's going to be the count distance divided by 117, because we want to do it for the full, times 100 to do percentages. And we'll say okay. So there we go. And we can clean that guy up, get it down to 2 decimals. Great. So we've got, of the 8 campgrounds that are within 100, that represents 6.84%. You could round that up to 7, right? The 19 comes in at around 16%, and so 7 and 16 equals, anybody? Right? The rest are going to be 77%, right? So 77% of them are at greater than 500 when you fill out your table, and it should all add up to 100, okay? Okay, that's how you do that. Cool. So we don't need the roads buffer anymore. We don't need to have these, the roads intersected with the buffer turned on anymore. And we can actually reduce some of the complexity over here by getting rid of some of these guys, okay? All right, and then I'm going to go out to my ownership and say zoom to layer. Cool. And then it's always a good time to save your ArcMap document. All right, we're getting pretty close to the end here. So, final part of the lab is we want to figure out how much area is within the vegetation area here along the river, and what the ownership categories are for those particular areas. So to do that, we're going to do another intersect, okay? So another little bit of overlay analysis with the intersect tool. And this time it's going to be 2 polygons, so it's a polygon on polygon overlay. So we're going to do our vegetation dissolve and our ownership dissolve. And we're going to put those inside, and this is going to be our veg own int for intersection, okay? And then we'll let that rip. Cool, and that is done. And we'll take a look at it, look inside its attribute table. All right, and in here we're going to have a value called owner class, and there it is right there. But you'll also notice that we got multiple different hectares, and this time the hectares matter. So what I'm going to do is get rid of this hectares here. I'm just going to delete that field. Yep. And we've got our other hectare here, and I just want to make sure I don't have any spares hanging out. Perfect. And I'm going to recalculate the old one. It's always a good idea just to make sure. Oops, I didn't want to go to there. I wanted to go to calculate geometry. There we go. And hectares, say OK. Very good. And now we're going to do a summary of the owner class. So I'll right click on it, and go to summarize. Great. And this time we're going to open the little plus symbol next to hectares here, and we're going to tell it to sum. So it's going to add up the number of hectares in every one of the ownership classes. And then of course we should name it something. So this thing is going to be owner area. Okay. And I'll say OK. Yes. And then I'm going to open up that table over here. And there we go. So from these different owner classes, we've got our local government, our private right-of-way, state government, undetermined, BLM, fish and wildlife, and water. And then these are the sum of the hectares on all these. Okay. And if we take a look at the statistics, the total is 25,099. You could round that up and it'd be 25,100 hectares. Okay, and so the table that we're trying to fill out looks something like this. So we're going to put in the actual number of hectares in each one of these different ownership classes, and then we can figure out the percentages, right? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this guy. So that's the sum, and I'm going to create a new field. And float it, and then calculate it with the field calculator. So it's going to be this time the sum of the hectares divided by, I'll just paste in that number I have right there, 25,099, and then times 100 to give us a percentage. And there we go, and then we can clean those up. Looking at the properties, 2 decimal places. Did it hold? I think, yep, it did. Great, and then if we take a look at the percent statistics, if we're lucky, 100.0003045, that's good enough, right? So we're pretty close. Okay, so I'll leave this on screen here for a second. These are the answers, and this is how you fill out the first column under number 13 in the lab. And I think I can even zoom in a little bit. Let's see if I can zoom in on the video. There you go. So you could pause the video there and get those answers. Great. Okay. Now, the very last thing we have to do is fill out the second column. And what it's asking for is land within 1 kilometer of the Missouri River. So we're looking for what are the ownership statistics and the hectares of ownership within 1 kilometer of the river. So if we zoom in here, I'm going to turn off this veg own. We don't need that one anymore. We can see we have the river. And so which layer is the river in? Well, if we look over here, it's into the vegetation dissolve. So I'm going to open up that attribute table and just select the river just by clicking on its row here in the table. And then I'm going to export the river out as its own layer. And you guys have been here before, so right click, data, export data. I'm going to navigate to my feature data set and just call this river. So I have to get a standalone river so that I can buffer it by 1 kilometer. Yes, I want to add it. Great. So I will clear the selected features. And so now my river is pink, and that's okay for now because we just need it to get a buffer. So now we're going to do a buffer on it, geoprocessing buffer tool. We're going to throw this new river layer that we just made in. We're going to put that into here. This is going to be our river buffer. Save that. And we have to tell it that we want it to be 1 and then change the units to kilometers. And leave everything else as defaults. We'll let that rip. It shouldn't take too long. And then we're going to have to intersect that guy with our ownership class again. And then we'll summarize again on that owner class attribute. So these steps are actually part of the question number 14 on how you go about doing this, right? And so you have to isolate the river from the vegetation layer, export it as its own feature, and then do a 1 kilometer buffer around it, right? And then you have to intersect the river buffer with the ownership dissolve and then summarize on the owner class. So there we go. So now we have this buffer, 1 kilometer around the river. We're going to get the geoprocessing tool, intersect, all right? And we're going to drag that river buffer over here. And we're going to put in at this time the ownership dissolve, right? And this is going to be own int buff, right? And I'm just going to put 1K on there just so I know it's within 1K of the river. There we go. And we'll let that rip. Very good. Cool. And so now you can see we just have the ownership within 1 kilometer of the river. Now we need to open that one up. Open that attribute table. And then we got to fix these hectares again. See, all these hectares are exactly the same. So I'm just going to delete that attribute column. Great. I'm going to check and see how many hectares I have. Now, if you have 3, then you delete 2 of them. I'm going to recalculate these ones just to make sure they're correct. Looks like they were okay. And now I'm going to summarize the owner class. Great. And I'm going to go down to my hectares and check sum. Super. And then this is going to be our 1K sum own. Something like that. Just these names don't matter too much as long as you can keep track, okay? And uh-oh, what happened? Attempting to complete the operation. Something went wrong. Okay, that's all right. It's not the first time I made a mistake in GIS. So let's go back to hectares. We're going to sum it. Probably that name had a number in it. It didn't like it. So this is going to be own sum, and then we'll just spell it out, 1K. Let's see if this works. Yes, and there we go. Yes, and we're going to open up that one. So there we go. So we've got a count of our different owner classes in there, but what we're really after is the sum of the hectares. So we can clean this guy up and tell it we just want 2 decimal places. Okay, and okay, and then let's take a look at the statistics on this guy. And so this is the sum, 54,796. And if you round it up, it's 97, and that's what we're looking for. So I'm going to copy that guy. And I'm going to go ahead and make a field, percent, and make it a float. Super. And then we'll go ahead and calculate it with the field calculator. So it's the sum of the hectares, right, divided by the total of the hectares that I just put in there, right? And then that's going to be times 100 to make it a percentage. Say OK. And there we go. And if we take a look, the statistics, it adds up to almost perfectly 100%. So we did do it right. And of course, we can also clean up the properties, get it down to 2. All right. Super. And you can round these up if you need to. So these are the answers for the second column of number 13 in the lab. And I'll go ahead and zoom in once for you. Maybe. Let's see, did it work? For some reason it's not, but you can stop and read this by taking a look at it, okay? So just pause the video and get the answers for that. Okay, so that's pretty much all of the analysis that we need to do, and we only have one last thing to do. So I ask you guys to make a map out of this guy, and just real quick, I want you to go to your layout view, and there you are. And so it's not a very good layout right now, but that's okay, because what I ask you to do is find the one campground that is on an island. So which one of these guys over here do we have that has the island feature? So it's the vegetation dissolve. And so one of our intersections was between the vegetation and the campsites, and it's this guy right here, veg camp, okay? So I'm going to open up that attribute table, and then I'm going to drop down here, select by attributes, and we're going to do river guide equals, get the unique values, island, great, and hit apply, and then you can see 1 out of 117 was selected. If I click here, it'll show us that one, right? And then let me just show you a little trick. Once you have one thing selected, then you can click right here, right click, and say zoom to, and boom, there it is. It just zoomed in to our one island campground. So now I can close this. So now we can clean some things up. We know that it's this campsite right there. I don't need my owner buffer anymore. I don't need my river buffer. I don't need that new buffer. So all these guys can just get made small. We're going to keep our original roads. We're going to keep our original campsites. And this is basically the map you're making. I might move the data frame down a little bit. I ask you guys to set it up at 1 to 50,000. So you could just type in 50,000. Right? And then hit enter. It'll automatically format it. And there you go. So there's our one campsite that's on a river, our map at 1 to 50,000. And I want you to put a legend on it for the vegetation and for the ownership. Throw a nice title on it, scale bars, north arrow, your name, and some projection information, and you're finished. Okay, so that's the end of Lab 8, the recreational overlay analysis for Part 2 for the Intro GIS class. And thanks a lot for listening, and we'll catch you next time. Have a good night.